He was the king of political law enforcement corruption in Mexico.
Carrillo was famous for the idea that if a load's lost, you kill everyone connected with it. That way you get the traitor.
He said that someone had to get their hands dirty for the sake of Mexico. And if that meant moving drugs, well, let's move them.
September 29, 1989. It was the largest seizure of cocaine the world had ever seen. Over 21 tons with a potential street value in excess of $7 billion, discovered in a warehouse in Sylmar, California. Boxes of the narcotic have been stacked 8 feet high alongside bags filled with over $10 million in cash. Investigators soon discovered that the drugs had entered the United States via the bridge that connects El Paso, Texas with the Mexican border community of Juarez. And while most law enforcement officials wouldn't learn his name for several more years, they were already experiencing the influence of a mysterious Mexican drug lord named Amado Carrillo Fuentes. His rise to power and ultimate demise offers a rare glimpse into the narco-political underworld of Mexican organized crime.
He says, I want to tell you a name. I go, okay. He says, Amado Carrillo Fuentes. And he said, I want to tell you one other thing. Never say that name out loud.
He was the king of political law enforcement corruption in Mexico.
There was a time when Amado was moving drugs in old commercial airliners, moving it by the ton. You know, 10 tons of coke, pure Colombian coke, in a passenger airline. That's how he got his nickname, El Señor de los Cielos, Lord of the Skies.
The 2,000-mile expanse of the Mexican-U.S. border has been attracting smugglers since before Prohibition, when men delivered whiskey to the thirsty patrons of Texas and Arizona. Marijuana was a drug of choice in the 30s. And after World War II, recovering GIs addicted to morphine created an enormous demand for heroin. For more than a century, Mexico's traficantes have catered to America's changing appetites. Smuggling activities are often coordinated from the state of Sinaloa, long recognized as Mexico's marijuana and heroin heartland. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration has even given the region a special nickname.
A lot of the drug guys come out of that area. It's very poor, you know, it's a lot of ranchos. And so DEA calls it Jurassic Park, because that's where the prehistoric monsters come from. Charles Bowden is a journalist and author. His book, Juarez, the Laboratory of Our Future, takes a critical look at the forces shaping modern Mexico. You have to understand, Sinaloa has always had a bandit culture, hereditary. It's, you know, an entire state with a Jesse James ethic.
Indeed, the tradition of smuggling is so strong that the region has its own patron saint. Jesus Malverde was a bandit at the turn of the century with a Zorro-like reputation for helping the poor. After his execution by government forces in 1909, villagers began to attribute miracles to the bandit martyr. Traffickers often visit his shrine to have bullets blessed or to thank the narco saint for their good fortune. It was into this environment that Amado Carrillo Fuentes was born in the early 1950s. We know little of his childhood, but in the early 1970s, his uncle, Ernesto Fonseca, gave him a job harvesting marijuana. Carrillo was starting his career at the very bottom. Fonseca was a powerful smuggler and original member of the influential Guadalajara cartel under the tough Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. A former Sinaloa State Police officer, Miguel campaigned for cooperation among the competing traffickers, a philosophy Carrillo himself would adopt many years later. This spirit of cooperation put the cartel in a unique position to benefit from another organization's misfortune.
He said, sure, they're running 3 people. 4 people total. 4 people total.
In 1982, U.S. anti-drug forces deployed throughout South Florida and crippled the distribution network of Colombia's cocaine kingpins. Stung by the losses, the Colombians needed a reliable way to move their product into the U.S. Miguel Angel jumped at the opportunity. The cartel had ferried cocaine through Mexico before, but this new arrangement would encompass much larger loads and bring much greater profits, up to $2,000 per kilo. It wasn't long before the Sinaloa drug lords were making more money than ever before.
Here in the Sierra Madre, where there's no electricity and people have thatched roofs, you start seeing nightclubs of lavish marble and things in the middle of nowhere. And then you notice that people that are barefoot have Uzis. And what are you supposed to think? They had a good corn crop?
It is unknown how Carrillo made the transition from harvesting marijuana to full-out trafficking. Most believe that Carrillo had completed his apprenticeship and was ready for a larger role in the organization. That larger role may well have included a 5-year stint as a member of Mexico's secret police, the DFS.
DFS stands for the Directorate of Federal Security, and it was the secret police agency of Gobernacion, which is the Interior Government Ministry of Mexico. Amado had one of those badges. He was an agent at the time of the bust of the Buffalo marijuana complex in Chihuahua, Mexico. A vast multi-billion-dollar operation, which at the time employed 7,000 farm workers on the marijuana fields.
The biggest drug plantation ever created on Earth. One so large it could be seen by American satellites.
The drug complex was exposed by DEA agent Enrique Camarena, who was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by leaders of the Guadalajara cartel, Carrillo's uncle among them.
In the investigations that came out later, it turned out that the DFS was deeply involved in the protection of this operation, along with the MFJP, the Mexican Federal Police, and the Mexican Army.
The cowardly murder of Enrique Kiki Camarena, special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration, was carried out by the Mexican government in conjunction, in cooperation, in partnership with the godfathers of the drug trade.
Phil Jordan retired from the DEA after 30 years of service, including 10 years as special agent in charge of the Dallas office and 1 year as head of EPIC, DEA's El Paso Intelligence Center, the largest database of drug trafficking information in the world. He and Camarena were good friends.
To this day, Mexico has never apologized for having captured and delivered Kiki Camarena to the traffickers.
Because of the international pressures that resulted, mainly from the United States, the DFS dismissed 400 of its agents. And I have to assume that Amado was one of those 400 who were dismissed at that time.
In 1985, Carrillo made his way to the border town of Ojinaga, a village situated near the Big Bend region of Texas that was rapidly becoming a major distribution center for narcotics in northern Mexico.
It had always been very important for marijuana and heroin, but after the cocaine smuggling shifted from the Caribbean into Mexico, Ojinaga became cocaine central.
At the time, Pablo Acosta was the undisputed crime boss of Ojinaga. Having smuggled heroin and marijuana in the region for close to 15 years, he had finally taken control of the region, or plaza, 3 years previous. In a process known as piggybacking, the Guadalajara cartel had added cocaine to Acosta's well-respected operations.
Pablo's strength was that he had the protection soda for that whole region. And so the cocaine coming in was secure. Nobody had to worry about it. If it was in Pablo's hands, it was safe.
Proof that Carrillo was in Ojinaga came in 1985, when U.S. Customs agent detained him for carrying an automatic rifle into Mexico. This was Carrillo's first and only run-in with U.S. law enforcement, and it produced the oldest known photographs of the man who would become Mexico's most powerful drug lord. Carrillo spoke freely with the customs officials, giving them a great deal of personal information. And even though U.S. intelligence had already identified Carrillo as a powerful trafficker, they did not know how the Sinaloan fit into Pablo Acosta's organization.
They seemed at least to have had a good friendship. Pablo, when I was with him, was very proud of the ingot around his neck. I asked him about that. It was a 1-ounce gold ingot, and he said it was a gift of Amado, and then he showed his watch. It was a solid gold Rolex that also, according to him, had been a gift of Amado. He wore it everywhere. He was, like I said, very proud of that. In fact, when he died, he had the same watch around his wrist.
Carrillo's arrival coincided with a sudden upswing in the amount of cocaine being flown into Ojinaga. Experts now believe that Carrillo's role at the border was a dual one: to coordinate his uncle's Colombian shipments and to apprentice under one of Mexico's most experienced smugglers.
Pablo Acosta was an expert at getting drugs across. He knew how to do it, and he taught Amado everything he knew. Amado was a little bit smarter though. Pablo Acosta used to freebase cocaine and do all this stuff. I mean, he was, even if he hadn't gotten killed in a shootout, he was on his way to an early grave.
Aging and addicted, Acosta was losing his grip on the plaza. Carrillo, by contrast, was coming into his own. After his uncle's arrest for the murder of Special Agent Camarena, it is possible to assume that Carrillo inherited his uncle's operation. In late 1986, Terrence Papa met both men and found the contrast memorable.
We were sitting there in an apartment above a radio station. There was a long table there, and there was ashtrays overflowing with cigarette butts. There were machine gun clips. There was his AR-15 right behind him. He had a .45 in his belt. At some point, he pulled out a little bag of cocaine and then a box of baking soda. He mixed the two up and then cooked it over a flame. And it melted, it bubbled up and then fused together. And for the rest of the night, he was either scraping that stuff into a powder, making packs of cigarettes to smoke that he kept in his pocket, or smoking the stuff. Everybody I've talked to about him attributes his decline and fall to cocaine. And then Amado came over. He walked into the room. He was dressed in Western, I recall. A little bit pudgy, friendly, a little bit overly friendly, in fact. There was one thing I remember, though, that really stands out, and that was a sort of a glint in his eyes. And I think he knew the fact that Pablo was talking to an American reporter spelled his doom. I think Amado knew that. He was aiming to take over, and taking over meant getting rid of Pablo.
We will never know if Carrillo ever challenged Acosta's authority directly, but in 1986, the two men exchanged heated words at a restaurant in Ojinaga.
Pablo and Amado's operation included a ranch not too far out of town, maybe 20 miles, where there was an underground storage tank. It's like, an old gasoline tank, next to a runway. Cocaine, 1,800-pound loads, and then offload it and bury it in a tank. And only the traffickers knew about this tank. Somehow or other, the DEA found out about this tank. Somehow or other, Amado found out that the DEA knew about it. Now, independently of Pablo, Amado had 6 people rounded up who had knowledge of that underground tank. And he had each one of them tortured to death to find out if there was a leak or if they knew anything about a leak. None of them did, but they were all dead.
Acosta confronted Carrillo, asking him what he had accomplished by killing 6 innocent men. Carrillo replied, coolly,
Eliminas a todos, eliminas tu problema.
it is better for 6 innocent men to die than for one guilty man to go unpunished.
I think Amado learned some lessons from Pablo. He didn't learn the crack cocaine lesson very well because he appeared to do that for the rest of his career. But he did learn that the high profile had some real strong drawbacks.
During his interview with Terrence Papa, Pablo had revealed part of the protection scheme unique to Mexico's organized crime groups, that in order to control the plaza, he had to make regular payments to both the Army and the Mexican Federal Police. As soon as the interview was published, the order came from Mexico City to arrest Pablo Acosta.
For the next 5 months, they chased him all over Mexico. He ended up hiding out in a river village on the Rio Grande, and he was trapped in an adobe hut for about an hour. They had a hellacious gun battle, and he was killed. He refused to give up.
When Acosta went on the lam, Carrillo disappeared. Some believe he was involved in Acosta's death.
I can't speak for the DEA. I can speak for the intelligence that was known, and the intelligence was that Amado Carrillo Fuentes paid the Mexican federal police $1 million to have Pablo Costa killed.
Never have a high profile. Don't talk to reporters. Don't let anyone know your name. Kill people that publicize your name. Because that's what killed Acosta. He became too well known, thereby becoming an embarrassment to the Mexican government that employed him, which they did. The police and the government in Mexico get a cut of everything, including crime. So if you want to be a criminal, the head criminal, you have to establish that you're in charge of the plaza, that you represent the criminal element. Then you can go to the comandante and cut a deal. And the comandante will tell you, you can do anything you want, but if it gets to be trouble, I'm going to kill you, arrest you, jail you. But if that doesn't happen, you just give me my bite, and you can do business. That was the way the plaza system functioned.
Over time, it was natural for individual plazas to band together into larger alliances. Carrillo's original mentor, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, expanded his operations north to the border, forming the Tijuana Cartel. Juan Garcia Abrego consolidated coastal smuggling with prohibition routes across the mountains to create the Gulf Cartel. The Juarez Cartel was under the control of Rafael Aguilar Gallardo, a former commander of the DFS, Carrillo's alma mater. It is from Juarez that Carrillo resumed his air shipments from Colombia, mere days after Pablo Acosta's funeral.
Bueno pues,
Aguilar's former role as a federal secret policeman gave him unique access to the workings of traffickers throughout the region, information he most likely turned to his advantage in growing his cartel's influence. It is believed that Aguilar had an existing cocaine deal with Colombia's Cali cartel before Carrillo came to Juarez. Carrillo's connection to the Median traffickers was a welcome addition to the business. Then in August of 1989, Carrillo was arrested in Guadalajara, charged with trafficking for the Colombians. The military confiscated 6 of his aircraft, 4 of them jets. He was released a few months later.
He was arrested, though. A photograph was taken of him that was distinctly different from the photograph taken of him in Ojinaga when he applied for a border crossing card. The only way that I could think of for a person to radically alter his appearance like that is through plastic surgery.
Carrillo was in prison when authorities discovered the 21 tons of cocaine in Silmar, California. It is likely that the young drug lord had helped transport the narcotics into northern Mexico.
I was in charge of the El Paso office at the time that happened. We had an idea that there was a lot of narcotics coming across. We did not know the tonnage, which came all through the El Paso corridor. It was all through the Amado Carrillo Fuentes' organization.
DEA in an intercept heard a conversation between a known drug guy in LA and a drug guy in Colombia. And the Colombian said, they didn't get the other 20 tons, did they? Silmar terrified the American drug community because it blew the whistle on how big the volume of the traffic was. And secondly, because they took it down and it never affected the price of coke on the street.
By the spring of 1990, Carrillo was out of prison and the Juarez cartel was experiencing a period of relative calm. In contrast, western Mexico was becoming a war zone. Shortly after the arrest of Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, the Tijuana cartel split. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman and Hector Luis Palma formed the rival Sinaloa cartel. Miguel Angel's nephews, the Arellano brothers, arranged the revenge murder of Palma's wife and children. The Sinaloa cartel retaliated by sending 40 armed gunmen to attack a discotheque where one of the Arellanos was partying. The bloodbath culminated in the 1993 assassination of Cardinal Juan Jesus Posadas Chicano, killed in a firefight at Guadalajara Airport.
What that killing did, it outraged Mexican society. And it showed just how brazen traffickers had become. It showed the horrible possibilities of Mexico becoming another Colombia.
The Juarez cartel took tremendous advantage of this uncivil war, expanding their territory and offering asylum to several traffickers caught in the crossfire. Even the Colombians found themselves having to make compromises.
When Carrillo decided Mexicans wouldn't simply take a fee to ferry Colombian coke, but would move it for half the load. Because then when they took half the load, they started displacing Colombians in the United States in the distribution system. And that's when the roar of money hit Mexico. And that happened between 85 and 90, depending whose accountant where. But the real architect was Amado Carrillo. The kid had a head for business, and he had a cold heart.
Carrillo streamlined the operation almost immediately, bringing the loose-knit cartel into the modern corporate era. He used cargo planes and passenger jets to transport 10 to 15 tons of cocaine at a time. His pilots filed flight plans that blended the contraband into legitimate commercial air traffic. If the flights were detected at all, Mexico's anti-drug aircraft would be left breathing jet fumes. It wasn't long before Carrillo was given his most famous alias, Lord of the Skies. Carrillo's growing legend made it impossible for him to remain hidden. In November of 1993, he survived the only serious attempt ever known to have been made on his life.
Amado Carrillo and his wife and children were eating in the evening at a fish joint, nice one. Suddenly a bunch of guys stormed in, started shooting. Carrillo escaped. It's believed by DEA that the reason Carrillo survived was he'd been careful enough that even his assassins didn't know what he looked like and shot the wrong man.
It is still unknown who ordered the hit. Some experts say it was Gulf Cartel leader Juan Garcia Abrego trying to eliminate his main competition. Others point to the Arellano brothers of Tijuana, who were upset because Carrillo had fronted money to their bitter rival, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman.
They have a saying in Spanish, plata o plomo. That means silver or lead. You take the money or you get a bullet. And that's how these guys operate.
Carrillo paid his loyal followers well. Conversely, he showed little mercy for the disobedient. And security leaks, intentional or accidental, were treated with the same swift surgical response.
Carrillo was famous for the idea that if a load's lost, you kill everyone connected with it. That way you get the traitor. And he did it. Carrillo took in 93 and 94 to killing people where he wanted the bodies found, and were tying them with yellow ribbons as a message. Gradually, Amado progressed. He apparently owned the only tiger in Juarez. There's a history among drug guys of liking to own big predators. In 96, the tiger escaped actually and ran around in the streets there. Was captured and sent to Ciudad Chihuahua, the capital, to be placed in that zoo. About that time, drug killings started appearing where the people would be dead, executed, hands tied, shot through the head, but would be delicately draped with these cheap tapestries with tigers on them. If you're found in this fashion, it's to send a message. It's a form of policing. And it was rigorous, and Carrillo was very good at it.
Under Carrillo's reign, Juarez was a city under siege, choking on the violence of its ruler. In contrast, the drug lord's hometown of Guamuchilito benefited from the drug lord's largesse.
He was very good with all of the people.
What did he do here, for example?
The main thing he did was build the church.
The locals there love him. For people who live in that area, poor farmers, he's money, he's wealth, and he's a father figure.
In late December of 1994, the value of Mexico's currency on the open market plummeted. Like most drug traffickers, Carrillo kept his fortune in U.S. dollars and soon found himself 30% richer. In 1995, however, events conspired to make Carrillo's empire even more profitable. Colombian police arrested the Rodriguez Oruela brothers, Carrillo's primary contacts in the Cali cartel. With the Median cartel in similar disarray, Carrillo arranged for the direct purchase of cocaine from farmers in Bolivia and Peru.
What Carrillo really did was become almost the single broker for cocaine. And he held 2 meetings with the other capos, heads of cartels, and here's the offer. I'll broker the cocaine and we don't fight over territory. And you just come to me, I'll sell it to you wholesale, I won't try and hog it, and then we just all have our little thing as far as distribution in the United States and we live at peace. Because Amado Carrillo was smart enough to know that war is expensive and peace is.
The Colombians recognized the threat for what it was. Carrillo had both the resources and power to significantly cut them out of the United States market, a market that consumes an estimated 400 tons of cocaine every year. In the end, the Colombians relinquished part of their distribution network in New York City to the Mexican drug lord.
There was a point in the mid-90s in which Amado could traffic cocaine all along the entire nearly 2,000-mile long border. He could even go through Tijuana up into San Diego and Los Angeles, even though some of his bitter rivals are there, the Arellano Felix gang, notorious for violence. But Amado was always a peacemaker. He believed, you know, as Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo taught him, that it's much better to work with your brother trafficker and make money than to kill him. If you gotta kill him, you gotta kill him. But work together and you can just make a mint. And that's what he did for many years.
He created a monster, I think. Before that, Mexico had always had 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 cartels, who the hell knows. And essentially, the government could always stay on top by playing one against the other. He consolidated and became as big as the government.
At every turn, DEA and other agencies were stymied by a lack of support from their Mexican counterparts. Carrillo's protection extended high into the echelons of power. Dramatic evidence of Carrillo's top-level collusion surfaced a few years later in U.S. federal court. Raul Macias, formerly of the Mexican Federal Judicial Police, testified that the local highway patrol had intercepted one of Carrillo's infamous air shipments in the northern state of Zacatecas.
A huge full-body jet put down on a dirt runway. It was like a 727 or 707. No seats, full of cocaine. Typical Carrillo operation, had a fleet of them.
Macias testified that when he and the other federales arrived on the scene, his commanding officer ordered the highway patrolman to stand down.
Somos federales, vamos a tomar control de la situación.
Macias then helped load the contraband onto waiting trucks. Macias also testified that inside police headquarters, he was ordered to replace the cocaine with wood and other combustibles. The cocaine, meanwhile, was loaded onto a large truck, presumably for delivery to one of Carrillo's underlings. The wood was then burned, masquerading as cocaine in a public ceremony of destruction.
This exemplifies the type of operations that Amado Carrillo Fuentes had. I can guarantee you that none of the 10 tons were destroyed, okay? Eventually, they found themselves back into the American market. Everything we shared with the Mexican government through the drug czar would immediately be reported to Amado Carrillo Fuentes.
In the spring of '96, somebody in DEA shared informants with somebody in the Mexican war on drugs. And for 3 months after that, bodies littered the streets of Juarez. They were instantly translated, you know, the names given to the cartel.
U.S. Customs agents intercept close to 1 million pounds of narcotics every year. The agency has had great success with its domestic air interdiction program, which monitors air traffic across the nation. When Customs identifies an illegal airborne shipment, agents go on the offensive, tracking and chasing suspects until they are forced to land. At the border crossings, gamma ray and backscatter X-ray imaging devices peer deep into the vehicles to expose expertly hidden narcotics. But even with the latest technologies employed to stem the flow of drugs into the United States, weak links remain.
The border with the most traffic on Earth is the United States and Mexico. 250 million human beings cross it every year. There is no way to police it. U.S. Customs doesn't inspect 10% of the vehicles coming in. What that means is, if you just threw the dope in the trunk and said, the hell with it, 90% would get through.
At the border, the odds favor the trafficker. When cocaine first enters Mexico, its wholesale price is approximately $2,000 per kilo, equal to about 2.2 pounds. By the time it reaches the border, that same cocaine is worth approximately $5,000. Once it crosses a border, The cocaine can fetch up to $20,000 wholesale with a street price that is potentially much higher. Even if you assume a remarkable confiscation rate of 50%, the cartel still clears 200 to 500% profit. And when you factor in the potential for corruption of U.S. officials, the odds improve even further.
There's documentation, there's cases where inspectors have been paid up to $1 million to look the other way as a load of cocaine goes through the port.
If you look at a checkpoint on the border and there's 30 guys working there, you'd have to be a fool to buy 30. You only need one. Just run it when he's on or she's on. You don't have to corrupt many. They'll tell you what you do next then. To protect your boy, you throw that guy a load. You say there's a Buick coming through with 200 pounds of coke in the trunk. So he looks clean. That's done all the time. And it's because the money's too big in drugs. Drugs corrupts everything and everyone.
The Juarez cartel had only one consistent vulnerability, its cash flow. Until the gargantuan profits had been laundered into legitimate-looking dollars, Carrillo couldn't touch them.
Drug money is not hiding in the ground in 55-gallon drums. Drug money is in commerce with the rest of the money. It gets there because money launderers use the same facilities that legitimate corporations use who earn money.
The laundering process was surprisingly simple. By secret arrangement between trafficker and banker, cash generated from drug sales in the U.S. was smuggled back into Mexico and deposited in any one of several Mexican banks. The bank would then issue the trafficker or his representative bank drafts in U.S. dollars drawn on the Mexican bank's accounts at major U.S. banks. The cash itself would then make its way back across the border by armored car and be deposited in the U.S. The bank drafts were then free to be laundered into legitimate business and real estate holdings around the world.
San Antonio, Texas, has a $3 billion surplus every year in its banking system that cannot be accounted by any calculus in the legitimate economy. Miami's $25 billion. El Paso, $750 million. If you wanted to hurt drugs by hurting money, you'd hurt it on both sides. But one side can bite you, meaning banking in this country.
The biggest lobby for the NAFTA treaty didn't exist in Mexico. It existed in the U.S. financial institutions because they were the beneficiaries of all the money the Mexican banks and corporations would bring to the United States. They're investing it overnight and earning from it.
At its peak, Carrillo was making an estimated $10 billion a year. In that same time, it is believed he was paying $500 to $800 million in bribes. Having risen to the top of his profession, there is evidence that the Lord of the Skies was looking for a way out.
In January of 1997, Amado Carrillo Fuentes, through an emissary, sent a message to the President of Mexico, Ernesto Zedillo. He said, I want you to stop harassing me. I want you to leave my business alone. I want you to leave my family alone. If you do that, I won't dump any dope in this country. If you don't, I'll leave this country and your economy will collapse. And that's absolutely true, it would. Because in 1997, Pemex was the biggest legal export petroleum in Mexico. It earned $7 to $8 billion a year. And in 1997, that same year, cocaine, marijuana, heroin was earning Mexico $30 to $32 billion.
The ultimatum may have been in response to the January 6th raid on his family's compound in Sinaloa. Carrillo's sister was getting married and he had flown home for the occasion. The police intended to capture the drug lord while he was relatively unprotected, but an anonymous phone call tipped Carrillo off before the police could arrive. Given how much money he was said to be paying the government for protection, it is likely Carrillo viewed the raid as an insult.
Amado, according to his lawyer and others, was a real nationalist. He said that someone had to get their hands dirty for the sake of Mexico. And if that meant moving drugs, well, let's move them. If it helps the economy, if it helps Mexico.
This wedding video is some of the only known footage of Amado Carrillo Fuentes.
He looks like hell. He looks like a CEO who spent 3 weeks on a corporate merger and hasn't slept and has been living off either whiskey or cocaine. And you can tell he's a man under pressure, that it's getting to him. It's like watching Scarface, the last reel.
In February of '97, Carrillo's empire began to shatter. General Jesus Gutierrez Rebollo, recently appointed Mexico's newest anti-drug czar, was discovered to be living in a luxury apartment paid for by Carrillo.
It was a scandal, a huge scandal. You know, to have the head of your anti-drug agency to be on the payroll of the country's biggest drug trafficker.
It's kind of like having somebody working at Los Alamos and giving all of our nuclear secrets to the Chinese.
The general's arrest came a mere 2 weeks after having been in Washington, D.C. to meet with U.S. drug czar Barry McCaffrey and discuss confidential counter-narcotics operations. To the press, McCaffrey even expressed his belief that the general was an officer of highest integrity.
After he was appointed, General Gutierrez Rebollo had a meeting with reporters. He said, you know, the problem isn't these big drug cartels in Mexico. You gotta be real concerned about these little cartels, the cartelitos. They're the ones that are really much more important than the big guys, because if you add them all up, they're bigger. He was telegraphing his message. He was saying, I'm not going after Amado.
Every year, the United States scrutinizes cooperative anti-drug efforts around the world in a process known as certification. Countries that fail the review face trade penalties.
The government and the media have unearthed new information confirming previous suspicions about the extent of narco-corruption within Mexican institutions.
This connection between Gutierrez and Amado was exposed by the government of Mexico itself.
Mexico's failure to confront these cartels does not protect a single child on any street of any city in the United States of America.
We stand by the decision, obviously, to have the United States certify Mexico. And we're very much opposed to the efforts in Congress to reverse that decision, because we don't see how it helps the United States to walk away from Mexico when both of us are together, working together in a fight in the drug wars.
It's almost become a ritual now. Every time certification comes up in February, the Mexicans end up offering something, a sacrifice.
It was a tremendous shock to all of us to have this General Officer Gutierrez Rebollo revealed, alleged to be a criminal.
There's two things about certification I think everybody should know. One, it's a total fraud. It doesn't change anything in Mexico. And two, it's a preposterous action. The country that should be decertified is the United States, with 5% of the world's population and a nose that sucks up half the world's cocaine. It is just a damn lie to say the Mexicans are ruining our country with drugs. Any demand for drugs will create a market. The drugs will be here as long as we want to buy them. If it's not the Mexicans, somebody else will bring them. But this is our problem, not theirs.
After the general's arrest, Carrillo went underground. During this time, he was reportedly seen in Cuba, in Europe, and as far away as Russia. Officials eventually learned that he was preparing to move his operations out of the country and down to Chile. If he was no longer welcome in Mexico, it was reasonable. Then Carrillo would then run his drug empire from the very bottom of the world. But Carrillo surprised everyone when he returned to Mexico City in July of '97, ready to undergo plastic surgery. He checked into the hospital under an assumed name. For over 9 hours, a team of 4 doctors operated on Carrillo. Radical liposuction removed 20 pounds of fat. Facial sculpting altered his appearance. In the end, however, an overdose of the tranquilizer Dormicum kept Carrillo from ever leaving the table. When officials learned that Carrillo had died under such bizarre circumstances, few were willing to believe it. After all, it wouldn't have been the first time a fugitive had faked his own death by leaving an unrecognizable corpse.
It so happens that the DEA or the FBI, I'm not sure, but a couple of agents were allowed to take fingerprints of the body. And the comparison was made with the fingerprint, the thumbprint of Amado's border crossing card that was issued to him in 1985. This allowed Thomas Constantine, who was DEA director at the time, to announce, even before the Mexicans did, that it was in fact Amado, and I think that's correct.
4 months later, Bodies of Carrillo's doctors were discovered stuffed inside oil drums along the side of a deserted highway. They had been extensively tortured.
It's widely believed that the family members did this to the doctors. That's very likely. The family wanted to find out why Amado died, and so they tortured people to death to try to find out what the truth is.
Through sources, know of a person who saw the body the night he died and said the sutures weren't even stitched. Well, plastic surgeons close the sutures. You're paying to not have scars. That's the whole idea, to change your appearance, which would suggest somebody deliberately killed him by injection.
The question there is, who injected the chemical? You know,
did the government kill him? Members of his own cartel, another cartel, American law enforcement, or the CIA?
Mexican authorities are convinced it was murder, but they haven't offered any evidence.
My theory is that he really did die under plastic surgery. He had been using crack cocaine for at least 10 years. That has a tendency to degenerate your organs, your heart, your liver. What the truth is, probably the Carrillo family, they're the only ones who will ever know.
Carrillo's sudden death left a power vacuum in the Mexican underworld. Within the Juarez cartel itself, no clear replacement for Carrillo has yet emerged.
after the death of Amado Carrillo Fuentes, a drug war, in the true sense of narco-traffickers fighting each other, emerged.
We like to say Mexico has been relatively quiet. The FBI figures 1,000 drug murders in Mexico in the last 24 months. I think that's low.
One of the emerging figures is a guy by the name of Juan Jose Esparragosa Moreno. His nickname is El Azul, blue, that means. He got that because his skin is so dark it resembles the blue-black sheen of a polished gun barrel. El Azul is one of the last old-time traffickers who really believes in peace and unity. And according to the FBI and DEA, he's back and he's big in the Juarez cartel.
Frankly, I think when the new Amado arrives, we'll never know his name because he doesn't want to become dead like Amado.
It has been said that if Amado Carrillo Fuentes had been offered the presidency of Mexico, he would have considered it a demotion. And whether powerful drug lords hold sway over the Mexican government, or the Mexican government holds sway over the drug lords, in the end, the citizens of Mexico are left with the same familiar question: plata o plomo, silver or lead? Will they turn a blind eye to the corruption and complicity, or will they fight the Amado Carrillo Fuenteses of the world?
We have in the past won major battles, but we're still a long ways from winning the war.
Amado Carrillo died in July of 1997. I haven't run into a single American who says I can't find any coke and I can't afford it. Heroin's so damn cheap now people won't inject it. They just snort it. No, his death meant nothing. It was like the death of the head of General Motors. The Chevys just keep rolling off the line. But you have to give the devil his due. He built something durable.
In Mexico, if you ask people about Amado Carrillo, ordinary Joe Sixpack on the street is going to say, well, he's still alive. You know, there's such belief in his myth, his power, his legend, that some Mexicans think he couldn't be dead. He's the Lord of the Skies. He can't die.